Hello, Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist. I'm doing my weekly show of The Line and the Atheist Experience that both go out on Sunday. Today's Monday, so here we go. On the Atheist Experience, we've got two hosts I've never seen before. One is Dr. Ben. He is a very young man. He's actually a student doctor, so he's not quite qualified. And we've got Adam El Masri, who I think was previously a Muslim and now describes himself as an agnostic deist, which I found very surprising. He states that he accepts it's possible there could be a higher power, which seems that he's inclined to believe in it, though he says there's not enough evidence to decide, so he's agnostic. Now, obviously, I take a very dim view of people pretending that thinking they're sitting on the fence and hiding behind the term agnostic. So he does call himself a deist, but it was difficult to decide really whether he believes in a deistic kind of God or not from what he said. But let's move on to the first caller. John called in to say that if atheism is true, there's no purpose in life. Well, obviously, we all know that it's not a case of atheism being true. It's a response to theistic claims, but they did not correct him on that because I think they sort of knew what he meant. That if it's true that there is no God, then there's no purpose in life. He says to the host, "Where do you get your purpose from?" Ben says that he creates his own purpose. He's training to be a doctor. His purpose in life is to reduce suffering, alleviate illnesses, and leave the planet in a better uh, shape when he leaves the world than when he found it, which I think was quite a good. It was quite well stated. Um, Adam compares it to. He invites us to consider an analogy, which is that we can think about either being hired to do a job where we've got a job description, and that's going to be in a theistic universe where we're more or less told what we're going to do and told what our purpose is, and we've got no choice, or where we're self-employed and we create our own purpose, our own job description, and we have got a true choice and choosing our own purpose. So, asked to describe what for him is purpose, John the caller says it's a reason to live. And so then Ben responded by saying that when he was a believer, he could have been an actor. Apparently, he came from a family of actors, and it was thought that he was going to be an actor, and everybody said he should be because he got talent. At the same time, he was jealous of people doing medical degrees, and he asked the question, "Well, why can't I be a doctor?" And it seems he left Christianity and he became a student doctor. And then the caller says, "Is that why you left Christianity? Because you wanted to be a doctor?" And Ben said, "No, actually, I left because there wasn't enough evidence." But I thought that was quite sharp of the caller there to jump in and say, "Oh, so that's why you left Christianity." Because it wasn't convenient for you. You didn't want to follow God's chosen path. You wanted to do your own thing. So I thought that was quite sharp of the caller to come in there. But obviously, John responded, realised how he'd kind of conflated the two and made a connection between them, but it was really just a correlation. He said no, of course, he left because there's not enough evidence for the claims of the religion. So the caller is saying that, well, we don't know. We may not know if there is a God or not, but we should leave the possibility open. And then it gets into kind of freaky territory. He suddenly moves on to subjectivism and morality and what prevents people from behaving immorally, what prevents people from going out and killing, etc., etc. And Ben cites group survival as a reason. I always find this strange when theists say, "Oh, what's to stop somebody from inventing their own morality and just going out and killing people?" Well, people do, and in particular, theists do, like Muslims who killed thousands of people in the 9/11 attacks. The fact that they believe in a God and the fact that people do believe in God doesn't stop them from making up their own morality. So I find that quite sort of crazy, that a false argument that people often say that. Well, what's stop people from making up their own? They do. They do it all the time, and nothing will stop that. Whether we live in a theistic universe or a non-theistic universe, people will make up their own morality, and that's why we have laws. So that's just me sounding off there on the subject. It wasn't said. Nothing was said in the call about that. And then he suddenly moves on. Oh yes, he makes a statement. Men who led the Allies in World War II to victory were Christians, and they question whether that's really true, whether they're devout Christians, and also really whether it matters whether they were Christians or not. Plus, actually, by the way, Hitler was a Christian. He was brought up as a Catholic, and he most definitely did believe in God. Um, I personally believe that he did believe in God because, apart from all the other evidence, I was reading Schellenberg's memoirs. I mean, he was one of Hitler's people, and he wrote a great big fat book while he was in prison. And he cited Hitler was getting very frustrated with Britain's refusal to join with Germany, and he was after the Battle of Britain. Of course, Britain won the air war against Germany, inflicting tremendous damage on the Luftwaffe. And Hitler, according to Schellenberg's response to this, was, "God will punish you, England." And I remembered that. And I mean, who else but a theist would say such a thing? God will punish you, England. Well, maybe God did punish England by the way things are going at the moment. But let's move on. So, yeah. So the question then is: are teachings of the Bible good for the community? Because Ben says that there are genocide is going on, rampages are going on. The Bible's very xenophobic. And then the caller says, well, at that time, as now, indeed, the world was not an easy place to live. And his conclusion seems to be that it was okay to commit genocide because at that time there was a lot of difficult and violent stuff going on in the world, and they had to protect themselves. And then he conflated two things. He made this amazing statement, which he said, teaching children to be trans is the same evil as genocide. And at that point, the host hung up. Somebody made the comment that since Matt left, a lot of people are now coming out of the woodwork that previously wouldn't have called Matt with this kind of call. And I'm starting to think maybe that's true. So anyway, the next call is Jamie refuting Islam. Yeah, he called from England. This guy called from Britain, and so often calls from Britain are so bloody awful. They're so embarrassingly bad. Almost wish they'd stop calling. And this one is he was saying, how can we refute Islam without falling into racism? And that in Britain, and not just Britain, but in the Western world, people are afraid of offending the sensibilities of Muslims, etc. But on the other hand, there are people who are just downright racists. And how can we be certain that we're focusing on the right critique and not falling into racism? And the hosts make the point that you've got to focus on the claims and not the actual people. But I just thought his call was just completely absurd. There's obviously a difference between there's a lot of anti-immigration sentiment in the UK at the moment, and a lot of it is actually based on racism and nothing to do with the false claims that are being made by Islam or any other religion. I mean, my own feeling is that it is primarily based on racism and maybe even xenophobia. I didn't really like his call at all because I don't really see that people are refuting. I don't see in my own country that anybody's refuting Islam and then falling into racism. What I see is direct racism, that we've got too many immigrants, we don't want them here, etc., etc. Send them back. And I don't think it's necessarily just that people are really concerned about immigration. I think most of the time it is actually a kind of racist thing that, there are too many people basically with brown faces coming into Britain. and it's not just that they're Muslims. I never hear people complaining about immigration saying that they don't believe that Islam is true and saying that Islam has got no solid evidence to back it up. So for me, his call was just completely absurd, embarrassing, and a kind of red herring. I think he's got some kind of issues, but let's move on. So Rick called in another one with a really strange call. Um, Genocide in the Bible is justified. He starts talking about all the barbaric tribes there were at that time who were sacrificing their own children, chopping babies in half, and they were inbreeding. And the justification, apparently, for the Jews wiping out these tribes is that they were inbreeding. Genetically, it wouldn't have been good. And it was actually in the interest of humanity to wipe these people out. The hosts say, well, that smacks of eugenics. And then he moves on to transphobia as well. He says, well, you don't tolerate transphobes. And, we also it is actually also justified to slaughter these people who are inbreeding, which I thought was completely ludicrous. Ben says, well, we don't kill people who are transphobes. We try to educate them. And we don't want to get into your nasty eugenics, so we're dropping the call. So that call was over. Okay, so we've got David, an atheist, calling in, says that his mum had an experience with God in hospital, and he told her that she's hallucinating, that she's wrong, etc., etc. And he asked the host if this was quite an interesting question, actually. Oh, by the way, I don't think that if your mother says she saw Jesus in a hospital, I don't think telling her that she's hallucinating is the right thing. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is to accept that she had an experience, and especially if it's your mother, basically not to piss all over her experience. There's a time for skepticism, and there's a time just to kind of be a supportive son or daughter, whatever, without kind of encouraging the belief. But are you sure that you really saw this? And yes, I am. I really am. I believe in Jesus now. Oh, I see. You don't have to. You've got to be careful particularly with family members, because you could easily alienate a family member. Some of you may disagree. Some of you might just come out saying, "Oh, that's nonsense. You're just hallucinating, you silly woman." But I wouldn't do that myself. So, yeah. So the interesting question that David asks is that if you had an experience and you saw Jesus or God and you were convinced that it was true, wouldn't you be afraid that if you went and told people, they'd be writing you off as a lunatic? And Adam said that if he said that for him to be convinced that what he had seen as God, a flash of light wouldn't be enough, a figure wouldn't be enough, but he would need to have a conversation, ask questions, get answers, and that would convince him that he had actually really seen God. But that he would not, and Ben also said that he would not tell people of his experience unless he had some evidence to back it up, which to me I take to mean that if it was just like a vision and there was nothing else, he basically wouldn't tell people. And if I had such an experience, I also wouldn't tell people, because as the hosts say, that a personal experience will always be personal. You can never transfer it to the other person. So that's it, really. That is it. Oh no, Henry, one more. Henry was. This is a quick one. Henry, turning people away from religion creates harm. And then he cites a study saying that religious people live longer. He's Googled it, etc. And the host accused him of confirmation bias. Actually, I Googled it too. There's a report in The Independent, a British newspaper, and to the effect that people with religious affiliation live 4 years longer. And they put this down to various factors: sense of community, meditation, prayer, and various other factors that could be a reason why religious people are living longer. But as the hosts say, that even if it's true, it could just be a placebo, and they're not interested in placebo. They want truth, even if it's not going to make them live longer. So, and okay, so now I'm going to summarize what happened in the line. Matt Dillahunty and Jimmy Snow. So first off is Kevin, who called in, and he's saying that he's a theist, and when watching atheist content does not feel good and needs to say a prayer to feel better. Well, obviously, Matt said this is quite natural, because obviously when you're listening to atheist arguments and you're seeing your belief system broken down, it will make you feel insecure. And what you're doing by going and praying is appealing for some comfort to reinforce all the irrational beliefs that you've got. He says that the caller Kevin says that he feels a presence when he's praying, and it gives him comfort and joy. So Matt, it basically goes to do you want to simply believe things because they're comforting, even if they're not true? And this seems to be the crux of things with Kevin, because he's saying that supposing it is just for the comfort, what's the harm in it if it's not affecting anybody? Matt counters that by saying that, well, you may not think that it's affecting anybody, but if you're going to appeal to comforting beliefs, you may be in a situation where you've got to act and do something, and instead of taking that action to maybe improve the situation, you might instead appeal to something which isn't real or true, just in order to feel comfort, which obviously is quite a strong argument against that kind of strategy. So then he comes on to, Matt says, what is your evidence? So to Kevin, what is your evidence? And his answer is prayer plus personal experience. And he goes on to say that as for his personal experience, he's going to believe that it is God unless it's demonstrated otherwise. Matt says, well, you're shifting the burden of proof. That's not how we do things. You don't believe in things until they're disproven. You believe in them when you've got sufficient evidence to believe. And then Kevin goes on to say that he doesn't. Yeah, he's asked by Matt, can you sort of define what God you believe in? What are the characteristics? And his reply is that he doesn't really know what God looks like. He can't really. He can't really say as such, but he tries to. He describes God as a profound, powerful entity which interacts with people. Matt says that's absurd. Then Kevin moves on very quickly from that to the moral argument, again saying that if we've got morals, there must be a God. And but then he pins him down again, says, well, let's go back to characteristics of God. Does it think? He says, yes, it does think. And then Matt says, how do you know it thinks? And then Kevin suddenly says, well, this is such a big question. The format of a call-in show is not really conducive to answering this kind of question. The scope of it is such that, anyway, Matt calls him out and says, well, that's dishonest, and now you're babbling. And then Kevin says, well, he's seen a God, and how can he describe it? Well, it's like an echo chamber of entities. Matt accuses him of that's just babble. That's just that doesn't really tell me anything at all. That's not really a description of God. And then the call is dropped. So then we've got Danny, who calls in. He says that he's a theist with doubts. And he says that 99% of the time, although he's a theist, he agrees with what is being said on the Atheist Experience in terms of all the criticisms. And he cites Martin Gardner, who is a philosophical theist, as somebody who inspires him. and he challenges the hosts, saying that he disagrees with them that 1% of the time when the hosts are saying that it's not a good thing to believe in something simply because it brings you comfort and brings you joy. And he thinks that he thinks it's a valid reason for belief. Well, obviously we've been down this road before many, many times. And he says that, he's had a much happier life because he's believed. And also he says that beliefs, he says that he's got to have hope in his life. And Matt says, well, hope is not belief. You can have hope in things even as an atheist. And hope and belief are two different things. And then the caller Danny starts sort of dancing around a bit and says, well, I haven't got 100% certainty that there is a God. And Matt says, well, you don't need to have absolute confidence. You need to have sufficient confidence based on the evidence. He says, well, he hasn't really got any evidence, and if he did have anything, Matt probably wouldn't find it acceptable. Again, that's something we've heard before. We've heard a lot of these things so many times. Matt asks him, is your belief irrational? He admits. Danny says yes. He says to some extent, yes, it is irrational. But he comes back to his original point that it's worth it because it gives him comfort. Jimmy chips in and says, well, it may bring you comfort, but for us, it's better to live in reality. And Danny says, well, for theists, if it makes them feel better and if it helps to make sense of the world, then it's not irrational. Matt says, thinking about all the beliefs in your life, how many of them do you apply that same rationale that you'll believe in something for comfort and you'll believe because it makes it appeals to a feeling and an emotion. How many spheres of your life do you have this belief in? He says, well, just one, just a religious sphere. And Matt says, well, you realize that's special pleading, and you've got all these spheres in your life, and the one that really possibly matters more than any of the others is the one that you're special pleading on, and you've decided to have irrational beliefs. Danny says, well, who's smarter? Because if the goal of life is to be happy, and I'm happier than you because I've got these beliefs, who's made the smarter choice? Matt then laughs at that and says, no, my choice is the smarter one because I prefer not to believe in lies, and I prefer to have my worldview based in reality and believe in true things. And then Jimmy, I think, says, well, obviously drinking makes you happy, doesn't it? So it's not necessary, and not necessarily. If you want to just be happy, then you can just go out and have a drink. You can take drugs, etc., etc. Matt says happiness is not his goal in life. He says that one of his goals in life is to help people out of religion. Danny starts babbling again, insisting that, come on, you know that happiness is the goal. Matt says, don't you tell me what my goal is. I know what my goal is. And then he just says, you're full of shit, I'm dropping you. And he puts the phone down. Okay, so we've got Mark who calls in. We've got another theist. He says that he believes because the preponderance of evidence points towards the existence of a God. How often have we heard that phrase, that there's a preponderance of evidence? Usually what it means is that, okay, we admit that taken on their own, no one piece of evidence is enough to support my belief in God. But if you put all these weak pieces of evidence together, then accumulatively, they do actually support the existence of God. So we've heard that so many times, and it's a fallacy. He's saying that for all the evidence we've got, existence and everything, the existence of life, the existence of the universe, God is the best explanation because of this preponderance of evidence. And then he kind of makes a bit of a straw man and says, well, you atheists, you're saying that either there's got to be certainty that God does exist, or there's got to be a sort of agnosticism where we don't know. Matt says, no, that's not what we're saying. It's not a kind of, we've got to have certainty that there is a God, or we're all going to be agnostics, and then he explains the difference between Gnosticism, agnosticism, and obviously belief, atheism, theism, etc. It's always a bad sign when people haven't done their homework and they don't actually understand what atheism is, and they don't understand what agnosticism is. He cites existence as evidence for God. Existence of the universe for him is enough evidence for the existence of God. And Matt then goes to his the butler did it in that analogy. I won't go through that because you've heard it so many times. And then Matt comes back and says, you earlier claimed there was an abundance of evidence. So what is this evidence? What is this abundance of evidence? He then stutters away and babbles a little, and then he effectively cites the cosmological argument, causation, the universe had a beginning, etc., the moral argument. Then he says it's not logical for A to cause A. The universe could not have caused itself. And Matt says, "You've still not given me your evidence." And then Matt challenges him and said, when they're discussing immoral, because obviously there's this claim that through God there are objective morals. And Matt asks him to demonstrate a value which has not been designated as such by a human mind, and he can't do that. And Matt says there's nothing intrinsically evil or moral, and the call is dropped. I can't remember. I think he hangs up. Moving on, we've got Dylan, who is an atheist, recent atheist. However, he still fears death. Matt brings on the Mark Twain quote, the Mark Twain, not coat. That would be a bit dusty and old, wouldn't it? No, he brings on in the Mark Twain quote, where Mark Twain says that he wasn't in existence for a billion years before he was born, and it wasn't a problem to him, and he doesn't see why it should be a problem to him when he finally dies. It will be exactly the same as it was before he was born. So he doesn't see why it should be a problem. I think that's personally speaking, this is me speaking now, I think that's not quite good enough, personally, because before Mark Twain was born, he'd never had life. So he'd never had something which he could lose before he was born. But the big difference is, after he dies, he will have lost something that he had, namely consciousness and life, or together themselves, life and consciousness together. So I think it's a slight, I'm not really sure whether it's a fallacy, because no, it's not. To me, it's an unsatisfactory analogy, it's an unsatisfactory analogy or argument to say that. And because when we've lived, the reason we fear death is because we've got life and we're afraid to lose it, and we're basically afraid to go to sleep forever and never have consciousness again, having already known what it's like. So I don't really like that analogy, and personally I wouldn't use it. I acknowledge I also fear death. I fear being asleep for all eternity, never dreaming and never waking up and never having any kind of consciousness. I'm an atheist. I fear that, but at the same time, I don't accept the proposition that there is any life after death. And it's damned unpleasant, this dying thing, but it's going to happen. And there's nothing much we can do about it. We'll just have to learn to, if you'll forgive the pun, we'll have to learn to live with it. So, Bill, pantheism. Pantheism. So for him, pantheism is like the ultimate reality. God is consciousness, and life is the expression of God. The universe effectively is God. It is conscious, and we are an expression of God in our conscious selves. And Matt says, as he's always said, that pantheism is effectively a useless God because we've got consciousness, and why add anything to it? Why add a God? Why add a label to it? It doesn't add anything. And the caller says, well, religious beliefs are a response to certain feelings that we've got. And Matt says, well, so we've got feelings, and we are inventing effectively religions to account for those feelings when there's really no need. So I think they lose the call there, and the show is over. So that's it with the line. 2 hours, personally, I think it's too long. It should be 1.5 hours. That's it, guys. I'll leave it for there. Leave some comments behind if you want to comment on any of the calls. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.